I'm Jim Kelly of the Center for Power-Filled Living. We have a ministry that tries to address the needs of the full person. A lot of ministries touch on one aspect or another aspect, but we try to look at the whole individual, because we find that if we leave one part out, that it seems to undo a lot of the work that we do. So to accommodate this, we have a nice little checklist, kind of a way to see how you're progressing on your own. This particular form is actually developed by the Brownback Mason Group, and we've adapted some of the extra features that we find important from our viewpoint. But each of these areas that you're going to be looking at is an important aspect. You have to take all of it in consideration, and we're going to review this as we go along. Now, initially, what we're talking about is the physical self. One of the things that we have to realize is that some of the things that we've done to ourselves, we've damaged our brain. And to heal our brain, we have to give the brain enough resources to be able to take care of that healing process, or that new connections to be developed. So in the aspect of the brain, we need to have nutrients in our system that our brain really needs. And as you can imagine, since our viewpoint is from a biblical perspective, we anticipate that God put into our environment all the nutrients that we need to grow a healthy person if we consume them in the correct way and in the correct forms. And one of the things that we are looking at is the most natural way to receive foods is just as raw as possible. Most of the things that we cook out of our foods are some of the things we need the most, the nutrients and the vitamins and some of the minerals we lose in our cooking process. So we like to advise folks to continue to eat foods as fresh as possible, as fresh from the grocery store as possible. And ironically, we find that the produce section in many cases has actually caused a lot of the food value to be lost. And that's because when food is picked and processed and carried, as it's allowed to gain temperature, a number of different kinds of nutrients are ruined. Ironically, this in your freezer section where you have the most nutrients. If you can go to your freezer section and pick out some fresh frozen things, they are more likely to have the shortest distance between the time that they're frozen from the field as possible. So if you can look into your nutrients in your freezer section, that would be the best to start with. One of the things we also have recognized is that our forefathers had what we would call today a hunter-gatherer diet. In other words, they had to look around in their surroundings and find the things that were growing that would be of use to them to eat. In that venue, we've also found that some current research that's done on MS and other types of mental disorders, that if somebody has this hunter-gatherer diet, they are actually meeting their nutritional needs for their brain to recoup their losses. In several studies that's coming to light now, we found that this hunter-gatherer diet has actually reversed the course of MS in many conditions. So it's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of observation now. And what is it that we're discovering? And that's still on the to be advised list. We're just watching this develop. Now, as a hunter-gatherer diet, what we need to see is about 9 cups of leafy vegetables and cruciferous vegetables. And the cruciferous vegetables are those type that are like the broccolis, the cauliflowers, the Brussels sprouts, and those types of things. About 9 cups a day, which sounds like an awful lot, but we don't need a lot of protein. Those types of vegetables are the most that we need. We also need the berries and the nuts. And in this venue, we're trying to give you an overall idea of where your best nutrition will come from for your brain's reconstruction. And one of the things that each of these areas provide is both the building blocks to grow new connections in your brain, also ways that your brain can protect itself from ongoing damage and stop it, and also to develop the neurotransmitters that you need for your brain to work more profoundly and more strongly. So we're talking about some very practical, specific items. Now, of course, you're going to need to have some protein in your system, and as you can imagine, as we've looked at different kinds of issues, we found that protein that we need is probably more of the grass-fed and natural grazing types of proteins. In other words, most cattle are run to a feedlot to fatten them up and gain weight, because when they're sold by the weight. And if a man wants to make a good profit, then that's a good way to fatten up their cattle. And many of us, including myself, love the taste of a good steak that has nice marbling in it that comes from eating those nice extra pieces of corn. Well, it turns out that's really not all that good for us. But cattle that's raised on what they would normally and naturally acquire, which is the grasses of the field, is a leaner meat and has more nutritional value for us. So if you can find grass-fed beef, and this is becoming more and more popular now, so almost every grocery store will have a section where you can find some grass-fed beef. Same thing that goes for other meats. One of our big problems is that the presence of corn is so overwhelming in our food supply. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's too much of a good thing. And the reason is this, that we need to have 3 different types of omega fats in our system to be able to develop our brain naturally and normally. What happens in the American diet is that because of the prevalence of corn and other types of things that's been pressured into our system, that the presence of omega-6, which is a vital and necessary nutrient, is overwhelmingly represented. In fact, compared to our forefathers, who had a ratio of 1 omega-3 to 1 omega-6 in their diet, our current diet, as it's been analyzed, has 1 omega-3 to about 30 omega-6s. So that's an overwhelming imbalance, and we suffer because of that. So we need to increase our level of omega-3s coming in to our system to try to compensate for that overwhelming presence. Now, one of the ways that we can guard against that is picking meats that are not corn-fed, that are more of a natural nature. So even the fish that are farm-raised are fed with corn-based feeds. So and chickens and pork and so forth. So try to find meats that are more a natural sourced feed. So as we're looking at the meats, that kind of rounds out what we're concerned with. So we need to have all those specific nutrients come in our system. Now we need to start thinking about why we're having difficulties in our brain. Now, inside the brain, there is a presence of different types of free radicals that are introduced into our brain system because of cellular damage of some kind or another. Sometimes because of the substance use, or sometimes it's because of just head injuries, just knocking your head very, very strongly. Sometimes it's because of some type of ongoing dementing processes. In any case, when the neurons are attacked, the cell walls break down and it releases aspects of the intracellular fluid into the cerebrum. And when that happens, different neurons are going to die. And I'll give you some specifics on this real quick. When our soldiers have been analyzed in the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, when they go through these horrific explosions and their bodies are shaken violently, many times the crushing and tearing of the brain that occurs tears apart some of these cell walls, and it begins to introduce these fluids from the inside the cell into the surrounding fluids. Now, why that's a bad thing is that the things that power the cell are actually very destructive agents. They will come in and destroy other cells. In fact, the Pentagon and the military medical folks have found out that even 18 months past an injury, the damage can continue in a soldier's brain unabated. So it is an unfortunate reality that we have to deal with this type of injury, no matter if we're a soldier or if we're in an automobile wreck. If those kinds of things are going on, then we have to deal with those types of injuries. Now, in a laboratory experiment, some scientists investigated the length of this, and they took a number of rats and intentionally made a damaged area in each rat's brain, very specific area, and then they routinely killed off a rat ever so often and checked for the damage in the brain. Now, what happened with these rats is the damaged area began to expand, and it continued to expand no matter unabated, no matter how long you kept on doing it. They just ran out of rats. The brain kept on getting more and more damage. Now, to counteract that, they found that if you introduce antioxidants, that you can actually stop that spread of damage immediately. So it becomes a wise course for us to have antioxidants introduced into our system. Now, antioxidants come in many kinds of forms. Many teas have very strong antioxidant properties, like the green teas and the white teas and so forth. And other things have strong antioxidant presence. The berries are great antioxidants as far as our food supplies goes. But let's think about vitamins. There's two types of vitamins that are noted antioxidants. The first one is vitamin C. Now, vitamin C dissolves in water and can go into our system in many types of concentrations. And in fact, vitamin C can be introduced in our system in very large quantities with very little risk, because vitamin C is water soluble. The body can process it readily if it doesn't need it. But the amazing things about vitamin C are, there's a number of them, but one of the things that you need to think about is this. If you are, say, a substance abuser, or you've been exposed to different kinds of chemicals or so forth, and they're in your system, one of the wonderful things about vitamin C is that it can act like a scrubber. It will clean out your system. In fact, many hospitals that deal with toxic conditions will give an intravenous vitamin C to try to clean out the blood of toxic and heavy metals and so forth. So it's an active scrubber, but it also invigorates and it charges up your immune system, which many of us need to have anyway. But if we have some process going on that's being destructive, that certainly is important. Vitamin C is also very necessary for your brain's regular functioning. And so all those things combined tell us that vitamin C is really a good thing to have, and to have it in a large quantity is not at all unusual. Many folks will take thousands of milligrams of vitamin C a day. It has many other uses that I won't go into here. The other vitamin that's really noted is vitamin E. Now, vitamin E, contrary to vitamin C, is oil-based. Vitamin E is amazingly powerful for a number of different tissue areas. It's really necessary. But to think of vitamin E as you would a protective measure, say, is you look at a kitchen that has a fire suppression system in a commercial kitchen being ready to be used at a second's notice. Very much like that in your brain. Just think of your brain as always being at risk of having some kind of damage going on. And vitamin E can penetrate the blood-brain barrier and be present in your brain, be ready to be used by your brain to counteract these destructive free radicals. Now, vitamin E is very good for a number of different body tissues, not just your brain, but I want to emphasize that every neurologist that I know takes at least 400 units of vitamin E a day, if not 1,200. And that ought to tell us something right there. Now let's progress on to another area that's really important as far as a nutrient goes. I touched on it earlier about the omegas. Within the cell of the neuron, there are sheaths that goes around those projections that are kind of like wires that connect the various cells of neurons throughout the brain. Your brain has about 100 billion neurons. And each neuron has the capacity to increase the number of connections very markedly. Some estimates has ranged up to 5,000 connections for one cell, which is an astronomical level of connectivity within the brain that is possible. This is something that must be challenged and worked on to achieve, but it's something that is been noted in the literature. So we have a neuron that is growing these projections, and one of the things that wraps around a primary part of those projections is a myelin sheath. Now, myelin sheaths do a number of things, but to oversimplify the matter, the myelin sheaths are kind of like an insulative covering, much like a wire needs to be insulated to keep from shorting out. Now, our brain shorts out in different kinds of ways, but that's one way it can short out, is if the myelin sheaths are not functioning well. The myelin sheaths also promote the speed of the conduction of that particular signal from one neuron to the next. Now, if the myelin sheath's not present or not in good enough shape, those signals are not transmitted properly. So the brain does not work well, and hence we have issues that look like Parkinson's or MS or various other kinds of conditions that let me just remind you of that study I mentioned earlier, where some studies were done for MS clients. Now, the doctor that discovered the value of the hunter-gatherer diet was herself a victim of MS and was incapacitated when she began this particular dietetic process. As she continued to do her own research, she found out that there is a very vital link of having the omegas into our system. And having those omegas there, those little blankets that are insulating blankets that goes around those projections, has to have omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9 to complete that blanket. Now, if you remember correctly, I already mentioned that we have an overabundance of 6 in our diet, so the intake of omega-6 is way out of balance to the other two. So we need to make sure we have enough intake of omega-3 and omega-9 in our system to be able to make these sheaths, to make these connections work well. Now, omega-3 can be found in fish. The type of fish that seems to be the safest without having other contaminants in it seems to be cold water fish, deep sea fish caught in the deep Pacific or so forth. There's other places that you can get omega-3s, and that's some plant sources, but one of the things that they found is that the uptake and use of these plant source omega-3s are not nearly as potent as the animal source, not nearly as bioavailable to us as animals. So we need to have those omega-3s coming in our system, and need to have plenty of them. Now, let's talk about another issue. Within the neuron, there's little cellular components that are called mitochondria. The mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cells of your body. The mitochondria are very necessary for the empowerment of your cells, and if you have any kind of conditions in your body that is a degenerative condition, those mitochondria are actually dumping more and more free radicals out. Well, if we have healthy situations and we have the mitochondria in the cell doing its job, it needs to have another chemical to do its job very precisely and very powerfully, and that is coenzyme Q10. CoQ10 is one of the most important things that you can actually add to your diet. We do produce in our system CoQ10, but not nearly on the scale that we need to as a healthy organism. We have to take in more CoQ10 to make us more and more functional. So the CoQ10 is a nutrient that we really need to add to our diet for our brain's best function. Now, as we're looking at those particular areas of nutrition, there's other areas that would help us out for protection. There is a spice that's very popular in Asia that's turmeric or curry, and a nutrient called curcumin is derived from those. Curcumin is very powerful in combating any kind of issues that are associated with the dementing processes. It militates against those kind of conditions on several levels. So curcumin is an excellent choice to have in our system. Another issue to think of is the quercetin. Now, quercetin is again, it's a natural occurring substance, and you find it in places like apples. Quercetin is a anti-inflammatory substance. It will reduce inflammation throughout your body. But your brain suffers from inflammation whenever it has difficulties, like we mentioned earlier. And the more that these areas swell, the less they function well, and the more difficulties that your brain has in functioning. So if we can have more quercetin coming in, whether it's through our dietary intake or supplements, then that would help our brain work as well. Another area that's been investigated pretty thoroughly and very little has been educated is the area of excitotoxicity. The excitotoxicity is when your own brain burns itself out. When your brain cells are so stimulated that they don't settle down and they eat themselves up and they absolutely use themselves to pieces. We can militate against this particular type of problem by having several different kinds of things in our lifestyle. But as far as a dietary intake, one of the things that will help us is actually magnesium. And magnesium is a little tricky to use, because if you take too much magnesium, you can give yourself diarrhea. If you find yourself taking magnesium and develop that, just back off on the amount of it. And it needs to be taken throughout the day. The forms of magnesium that to look at is, it looks like a time release form would be the most potent for us, the best for us. So it can be released over the full day. If we can't get that, also try to look for magnesium malate. That's probably the one of the better forms of magnesium to be taking in our system. So now that we've reviewed those areas, I want to point out one other area of our body's needs, which is sleep. Sleep is something that's really vital for our health, really vital for our brain to do. And there's lots of things that we do that just ruin our sleep. Taking different kind of medications and taking drugs of different kinds that are illegal drugs will ruin our sleep cycle. Anybody that's been using will tell you that their sleep cycles have been severely disturbed, and it's hard to reestablish a sleep cycle sometimes. Depending on our dietary intake, sometimes we have other things that irritate our brain. We're not able to get to a restful state. We overstimulate our brain in different kinds of substances that we take in. So having a routine is really important for our sleep. Having a opportunity to take biofeedback on the neurofeedback level will definitely impact your sleep. It's one of the most universal findings of using the neurofeedback is the fact that we can start pushing our brain back into regular sleep cycles. Now let's talk about the cycling of sleep for a little bit. One of the things that we find with a lot of folks is that their sleep cycles have been completely redone, and that they don't work properly anymore. When we go to sleep, we go through several different stages of sleep. Some of you may have heard of the REM sleep. That's a dream stage. There's a light sleep. There's a deep sleep. And the deepest sleep, the body is almost like it's dead. It just completely lies there, completely still. Now this is very critical for our health and well-being. There are various processes in our body and various chemicals for healing and reconstruction that will not be engaged unless our body is in enough deep sleep. That's why your experience is when we don't get the right kind of sleep that you don't feel rested and you don't feel up to your usual strength, because our body is not, it's just the way it is. Now, how neurofeedback can help this is that neurofeedback will train your brain to go in and out of different kinds of frequency ranges, including the ones that are used in your various sleep cycles. The more that the brain is able to cycle through these different kinds of frequencies, the smoother you'll be able to use them when you go to sleep at night. So it has that particular effect on almost everyone that we've ever trained. So sleep cycles are very good, and it's going to help us out in other areas of our life, just getting enough sleep. Now let's talk about exercise. Now we found that exercise has a lot of wonderful health benefits, obviously. But in our brain, it also has some unexpected benefits. When we go through cardiovascular exercise, we generate a substance that's called brain-derived neurotrophic factors. These are enzymes and proteins that are designed to reconstruct or to rebuild or to build out different areas of our brain. We need to have our brain constantly developing and growing, because our brain has to assimilate all the things that we've experienced that day and process them. And having this asset of a good cardiovascular exercise to generate these brain-derived neurotrophic factors is really important for us to increase our brain's capacity. So if you do have a lifestyle that you do exercise, don't just sit back and rest when you get through with your exercise, because you're wasting all those nice new nutrients in your brain. Grab a hold of some kind of task. Read, learn a language, do something that's challenging to your brain, some puzzles, some creative types of expression of music or art. Do something that will make your brain work, and take advantage of that new resource that you got from your good hard exercise. Don't waste it. Now, another thing that we have to realize about this is that recent studies are showing that if you want to cut your risk of Alzheimer's, and if those of you that have been abusing drugs have increased your, depending on the study, have increased your chances of Alzheimer's from 8 to 40 times what I would have, plus you have it coming into your system over about 20 years before I will. So here's a a very dangerous kind of condition that may be in play in your brain. If you want to militate against Alzheimer's, what you can do is just exercise, cardiovascular exercise. That means you breathe hard and sweat after your exercise for 20 minutes every other day, and that's enough to cut your risk in half. Now that's a significant health gain. It also is going to give your body more oxygen than it had before, and one of the things that our body uses to get poisons out of our system is this exercise. The heavier that our breathing, the more the toxic gases get out of us, and the sweating eliminates a lot of poisons that are in our system. So it's a good way to purge our system of things that are not good for us. And in our American sedentary lifestyle, we've really pretty much messed ourselves up along that line. So it's really a good idea to get this exercise out. Now, I'm going to take a break, and we'll come back for our next segment of this particular group of forms.